I was born in New York City. I consider myself an ABC from NYC. Now, ABC means American-born Chinese. It's probably my life's work, photographing Asian Pacific Americans. The motivation was to, at least for the general public, if not for Chinese Americans, to see that they are part and parcel of a community. In this case, it was New York City.
I met Corky, I guess, about 12 years ago now. I think it was 2000, 1999 or 2000. Corky had a large exhibition at the Museum of the Chinese in the Americas, MoCA. And I was actually, at that time, working very much as a photographer contributing to the New York Times. And one day I received an assignment about this Chinese-American photographer, Corky Lee, and could I go photograph him? I think one of the things really interesting about the time that Corky started working and photographing is that Chinatown here in New York, and in fact in the Chinese community throughout the United States, was changing very fast, because up until 1965, the Chinese community was very small. By the early 1970s, which is really when Corky is, I think, working very hard to document the community here in Chinatown, Chinatown was going through this first moment of big growth. Corky was using his camera to document all this, and his pictures are, I think, both historically important because they're so unique and very beautiful.
I've been photographing Asian Pacific Americans for 40 years now. The seed may have been planted or started to germinate when I was in the lower grade schools, in which I saw a photograph of the completion of the completion of the transcontinental railroad. And I went to looking at the photograph, to count how many Chinese worked on the railroad. If you read about it in history, and they have a photograph, that they must be there. But when I examined the photograph, I couldn't find a single Chinese. So I said, well, you know, how true is this? So that was a seed that I got planted. And I probably didn't pick up my first camera until after I got out of college. There's only a difference of like 3 inches. You know, depending on how you measure it, she's 3 inches too short or she's within the 3 inch. It's actually a matter of principle. If something has been there and has not been obstructive for 35 years, why is it obstructive now? I've been trying to introduce her to newspapers and media. She came to a workshop on how to get your news into the news. She's a single mom. She's got 4 kids. She doesn't have any other work or any skills. Why don't you just, you know, give this woman the grandfather clause and let her stay? If she's forced to close, to move the newsstand, or to even build one, she loses the income for that whole week, or if it takes a week, or maybe even longer. As long as she can stay here, then that's fine. You know, and I think she's already gotten over 1,000 petitions signed for her to stay where she is.
Corky has an artist's eye, but he also has an activist heart. That's what I think the difference is between Corky and a lot of these photographers, you know, because he's shooting what he feels in his heart, and they shoot what they think will get them paid. I think that I would categorize myself as an activist photojournalist,
because I was an activist before I got into photography. I was working for a social service organization dealing with tenant-landlord issues. So that the tenants would organize, in this case mostly Chinese tenants, they would organize by withholding their rent in an escrow account. And as the account grows, it would force the landlord to make the necessary repairs and changes and bring the building up to code. I would take before and after photographs, and after one group of tenants in one building would win a fight, you go to the next one, and all you have to do is organize into a tenant union, withhold the rent, and it'll happen. You feel good about some of these changes that you can bring about through photography and organizing. In 1971, I organized a street fair because we realized there was a lack of preventive medicine in Chinatown. Everything was basically for free. A lot of people thought that we were Heng Wei Bing, you know, little red guards, because we're doing things for free, giving free medical care and so forth. And you know, so we got the label as being communist inspired. And some people, very conservative people, felt that the Cultural Revolution was moving from China to Chinatown. You know, it was no such thing, but yeah, I understand why people think that. 1975, there was a growing resentment about the way the New York City Police Department was handling issues in the Chinese community. All of Chinatown closed down, marched to City Hall to protest police brutality. And in the process, the police were trying to clear the crowd. They hit and struck one bystander, and I was able to get that photograph. And then that sort of convinced me that, you know, perhaps, you know, my calling is photojournalism. Most of my photographs have to do with the daily lives of Asian Pacific Americans as well as civil rights. I've utilized the photographs in books and magazines and basically to show that there is an existence of Chinese Americans in this country, and it defies the stereotypes. The stereotypes are that the Chinese or Asian Pacific Americans are pretty docile. You know, they really don't express anger or frustration about things that actually affect them. I think as a result of the civil rights movement from the 1960s, you know, Chinese and other Asian Pacific Americans are showing their disdain for things that affect them. I think, you know, ordinary people are probably are the most genuine. I really don't, in my photographs that I exhibit, I really don't show too many, you know, celebrities.
When people were protesting, tenants were protesting against landlords, for example, they didn't have a voice. They were ordinary working class people for the most part. So when someone like Corky says, okay, I'm going to help give this a voice, I think that's really important. Because especially in the 70s in Chinatown, it's not like if Chinese demonstrators were going to, tenants were going to protest landlords, it's not like that the New York Times would be there and, you know, the TV news would be there. No, they would not be there because they wouldn't know about what was going on in Chinatown. It was not a community that they knew a lot about. It was not a community that they had any way of understanding. And someone like Corky really helped shape that. He really helped give not just Chinese Americans a way to see ourselves, but also the bigger world a way to see Chinatown.
I'll give you 2. So you get to vote twice. This is a true election, would be pretty scandalous. This one, the individuals here are veterans. They were actually Filipino Americans. Okay, during the Second World War, The American government promised Filipinos who fought on their side against the Japanese that they would get veteran benefits and U.S. citizenship. But it took until the first year of the Obama administration, 2009, that they finally got what was promised to them. So this takes place actually at a Philippine Independence Day celebration. So they had basically, it was raining that day. I don't know if you could see some of the raindrops on their jackets and stuff. The way I relate to other Asian cultures and Asian Pacific Americans, I would go to events that they held. It could have been a celebration for India Independence Day or Pakistan Independence Day, the beginning of the Sikh religion. Some of them were parades, and other times there were protests against racial profiling and stuff like that. So I would go to these. Some people always at these events would recognize me. So finally they would ask me, they would think that I'm a member of the press, and I would tell them that I'm photographing and documenting Asian Pacific Americans. I went to Central Park, and there were about 2,500 Sikhs. These are people who, South Asians who wear turbans. They were victimized, immediately after 9/11 because they saw images of Osama bin Laden, and he wore a turban. It was a different type of turban. So there was a lot of racial hatred towards Sikhs. They gathered to say that Sikhs are not terrorists. Sikhs are a different religion. So I took that photograph, and the fellow he wore a turban, and he had an American flag wrapped around him. And it was sort of like he was using the American flag to protect him and his entire community, and said, well, we are patriotic, we are American, don't beat us up. It's an image that is seared in a lot of, South Asian minds, that, what happened then could probably happen again.
I think that a lot more people, not only in the Asian community, should know who Corky is. I think a lot of people should, because I think that by him setting that example, because I know that it helped me to say, okay, I could do this.
There's still a lot more of Chinese in New York City or Chinese in America that I have not photographed. And it will probably take me my entire lifetime. I continue to pursue photography because it's more of an enjoyment and a satisfaction that I'm doing the right thing. One of my quests is not for people to remember who I am or what I represent, but if there's a book around and people go to a library, if there's still libraries, like 50 years from now, or at least, on the internet, and if they want to look at what were concerns of Chinese Americans or Asian Pacific Americans, and see and understand, or try to understand, then my job is done. I could be happy 6 feet under pushing up daisies.